communicate to us or give us hints or ideas, and when we stumble upon some of these things, okay, granted, not all of them might be true, but still, it something ignites within us that kind of almost arouses us. This is fascinating. This tells us about potentially something about our past. I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but that's my point.
No, very much so. That leads to a really fascinating area. If you suffer from amnesia, there are things you don't remember. Occasionally, somebody suffers from amnesia because they have experienced a traumatic shock, an event which was so shocking that their very survival was threatened. And in order for a human to survive, it's sometimes necessary to block out memories of shocking events. Graham Hancock has written extensively on many subjects around this area, and he made a very interesting comment. He said, the human race is like a race with an amnesia.
Yeah.
We don't recall our past. We cannot remember our past. And I thought, that's an interesting comment, but I didn't appreciate how interesting until I read a book by Immanuel Velikovsky. And the book was called Mankind in Amnesia.
Yeah.
Implying that mankind, i.e. all of us, the human race, suffered a traumatic event which brought us to the brink of extinction within human memory, i.e. within recorded history. No, I hear you say, if it was in recorded history, we would have read about it. You have read about it. It's in the Bible.
Among other places, of course. Yeah.
To interpret it. If an event occurred that brought the human race to the brink of extinction, what could have caused such an event to happen? Now, we know about natural disasters. We know about volcanoes and earthquakes and tidal waves or tsunamis. We know about hurricanes and typhoons. We know about floods. All of these are local events. A volcano may be extremely destructive if you happen to live within a range of its lava. A tsunami will be a violent event if you're in its way. Same with any other natural event. A typhoon will, which is what it's called in the Pacific, a hurricane is what's called in the Atlantic. Any of those will be destructive in the extreme if you're anywhere close. But they're all local events. They're local to that particular area. You probably read about or watched pictures of the Boxing Day tsunami in the Indian Ocean. It would kill 250,000 people. Extremely destructive event. But local. Well, it didn't affect you. It didn't affect me.
Right.
It didn't affect anybody living in Europe, America, or Africa. It affected people living in Ceylon or Sri Lanka and parts of Southeast Asia. It was a local event. What event would affect the whole human race? The only event that could do that is an external event. Something approaching from space. Something that we can all be aware of. The whole human race can be aware of the approach of an object through the solar system. We're all aware of the moon because the Earth revolves, the moon revolves, we all see it at various times. Supposing we looked up in the sky and we see an object that shouldn't be there, a flaming object, let's say, like the sun, and getting closer because it's getting larger, and it appears to be on collision course with Earth because it's aiming directly at it. Every day we wake up and we look in the sky, it's still there, and it's getting bigger, and it's coming towards us. And there's nothing we can do about it. And as we watch it, it approaches, and it gets bigger, and it gets bigger, and as it gets close to Earth, what starts to happen is you will get electrical discharges. They were called thunderbolts, because that's what they sound like. If if you've ever seen a huge electrical discharge, it makes an enormous amount of noise.
Mm.
It's like a lightning strike. If you've ever been close to a lightning strike, it's extremely frightening if you're close to it. Imagine a lightning strike thousands, if not millions of times bigger, and many of them, because as an object approaches Earth, most objects in space are electrically charged, and this is one of the key points, the electrical potential of space.
Indeed.
As an object approaches towards Earth, there will be discharge between these two objects, Earth and the approaching object. And as it approaches close, it will discharge from higher potential to lower potential. It is a standard feature of the physical universe. You will get discharges like water flows from high pressure to low pressure.
Right.
Electrical discharges will discharge from high pressure to high potential to low potential.
Mm-hmm.
One of the objects may well have been smaller than Earth, approaching Earth, would discharge from Earth to the object. But the key point, and the evidence for this, is contained on the smaller object, the moon.
Mm-hmm.
We look at the moon and we see what we're told are craters.
Right.
Made by impacts. Yes, there are craters on the lunar surface made by impacts, but they're relatively small, maybe 10, maybe 15 miles in diameter. Not very big. When we look at the moon with the naked eye, we can see circular impressions, which are wide, but very, very shallow.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, looking at close-up photographs, you'll see many of the craters have flat bottoms. They're not saucer-shaped, which is the shape you get from an impact. If they are circular with flat bases, that is the impact created by an electrical discharge. The lunar surface is scarred by electrical discharge, not by impact. That answers many of the questions about the presence of the moon and why it looks the way it does. So this object approaches towards Earth. We know the moon creates tidal forces on Earth. That's why we have tides.
Right.
The gravity of the moon is sufficient to move oceans on Earth. Supposing the object was the size of Venus, what sort of tides do you think that would create? They would be vast.
Mm-hmm.
They would cover countries. As this object approaches, it pulls the oceans towards it by its own gravity. The closer it gets, the more the oceans pile up towards the approaching object. In the Bible, it's described as the flood. As the object passes the Earth and goes away, the tides lessen and the waters return to some of their previous places. Not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah.
There is so much evidence for an event of this magnitude occurring on Earth within recent memory.
Mm-hmm.
Just take one example. If you buy a piano, it will have ivory keyboards. If you play snooker, you will have played with ivory balls.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where does that ivory come from? It's not elephants. There aren't enough of them. It comes from Siberia, where mammoth tusks are heaped up hundreds of feet high on what are called the Mammoth Islands north of Siberia, towards the Arctic Circle.
Mm-hmm.
They were imported through China at the beginning of the 19th century by traders who discovered that there was a use for this apparent bonanza of material. Mammoth tusks.
Right.
What are they doing in Siberia? Elephants, we know today, are animals that live in warm countries.
Right.
And mammoths, we're always told, had coats because they lived in Siberia. Well, no, tigers live in the tropics these days, and they have pretty thick coats. It doesn't there were so many of them, and they were all killed at once. That's why there are tusks and bones hundreds of feet high in Siberia. The same in Alaska. There are trees and rocks and animal bones all jumbled together in huge quantities, vast quantities.
Is this
only thing that could do that is water.
Yeah, Marcus, is this that you mentioned? Is this the Mammoth Island? Is that Wrangel Island?
That's the one. Yep.
Hmm.
Yep, that's the one.
Very interesting. So what you're saying there is that potentially then a large amount of animals have gotten themselves up to this high point when this catastrophe happened. Is that what you're saying here?
That's exactly what I'm saying. That as the water was attracted to the approaching, we'll call it a planet, because I don't know what the object was. I suspect it was the planet Venus.
Right.
And the date for this would have been in the order of 1600 BC.
Mm.
It's recorded in the Bible in very distinct terms. It's recorded in Egyptian mythology. It's recorded in Mesopotamian records. It's written about. It's just that we don't want to believe it happened.
Yeah.
As the water, the Gobi Desert, for instance, is now a desert. It used to be a huge lake.
Yeah.
That was what caused most of the destruction. It was pulled north. Because Siberia and Alaska are relatively close. There was later, about 900 years later, there was the passing of another large object close to Earth as well. This was the planet Mars. Because we assume that, and this is based on Isaac Newton's theory of gravitation, that all the planets we see, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and so on, have always been in the orbits they currently occupy. Not the case. Not always the case. In Mesopotamia, present-day Iraq, the Sumerian civilization only recorded 4 visible planets.
Right.
The one they didn't record was Venus. Now, this was recorded about 3000 BC. Venus only appeared relatively recently, and Venus is an extraordinary planet that is still very, very hot.
Right.
I think the current temperature is somewhere in the order of 600 degrees. It's a planet that is very recently formed because there's no way it should be that hot. It's far hotter than Mercury. Mercury is much nearer the sun. Mars also exhibits a degree of evidence that it has been hit by electrical discharges. Mons Olympus, the tallest volcano the biggest volcano in the solar system, certainly the biggest on Mars,
right,
has secular indentations at the top. These are electrical discharges. This is the impact of electrical discharge. They're flat circular impressions. Mars also has a major canyon down one side, as if it has been approached by another planetary body.
Right, Valles Marineris, I think they call it.
Sorry?
Valles Marineris, I think they call the canyon.
Exactly right.
It's huge. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah, it is far bigger than anything on Earth, and Mars is only 2/3 the size of Earth. So it must have been pretty close. The implication of all this is that the planets we see in the solar system, in fairly predictable and stable orbits today, were not always in those orbits, let alone as stable.
Right.
And again, this is part of history which is opening up. Now, I made mention at the beginning of the book, Mankind in Amnesia, and you'll notice obviously the similarity between that and Graham Hancock's reference to humans being a race in amnesia.
Right.
Quite a lot of Graham Hancock's research did come from Immanuel Velikovsky. But many people will say, but Velikovsky